when were you able to discover that this was a pathway that you wanted to pursue? And then I also, Margie was talking about wanting to produce and as in the A&R space, so talk to us what that actually means and what your role is producing an album is too.
Yeah, I mean, I think it seems to me like over the years, talking to different A&Rs, it's always a different pathway. And for me, I always like to say I kind of Forrest Gump my way into the gig, really, because I come from more of a radio background. You know, this could be an incredibly long story, so I'll shorten it up. So anyway, the radio station I was working for, which is the one in the background, is K-Jazz. When it folded, I was doing some independent radio shows for other stations and syndication, and then that kind of fell to the wayside. And my father, who was actually he was the morning DJ for the radio station KJazz and a few others. He was actually working radio for Concord Jazz way back when. So in only a way a parent could talk to a child who's a grown adult and has done things, he said, you know, Concord's hiring for a holiday out in the warehouse. So I actually took it because when you worked in the warehouse, you got free CDs. So I was still kind of jonesing off that kind of vibe. And then just, I don't know, after a while, people found out that I worked at the radio station. So I had a little bit of a music background, and some way, somehow it got to my boss, mentor at the time, John Burke. And for whatever reason, I don't know if it was a test, but I was building some type of desk, believe it or not, in his office. And he was working on a record. I think it was like a Stanley Tarantino record. And I'm usually pretty quiet person, but for some reason, music, I always would run my mouth. And he was listening to something over and over again. I was like, oh, it's a little out of time or something like that. And he was just like kind of cool about it. He was like, what do you mean? And I was like, you're listening to it over and over because it's out of time. And then he really didn't respond. So I was like, okay, I'm about to get fired. So then over the course of the next month or so, you know, we changed ownership, was moving to LA, and I made like this big proclamation because I'm from the Bay Area that, you know, I'm definitely staying in Oakland. And then he came back to my desk, and I literally thought he was firing me. He said, let me talk to you in the back room. And I said, okay, here we go. And then he said, would you like to come to LA with the company? You could do A&R with me, and I'll teach you how to produce. And next thing you know, I'm in LA and doing something entirely different. I mean, as far as a skill set, I mean, honestly, the only skill set I ever had, which was completely useless up until that point, was I was a music head. I was just totally a geek on music, and I just loved music. You know what I mean? But you know, he kept his word. I mean, he taught me how to produce. I guess he saw something. I was in a lot of sessions with him, and then learning the craft. And then, you know, I thought he had me starting too soon, but then he just said, you know, hey, it's about time you produce a record, and I just kind of went for it. You know, it's actually it's funny you talk about when you know, I had, like Margie, I had no idea, or music never was a thing for me. It was, but it wasn't. I never thought you could make a living off it. I was a frustrated musician that knew I couldn't do it. So I didn't know what I was going to do. And then all of a sudden, when I was in the studio, I don't know, when you get past the nerves factor, it felt pretty natural.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So from that standpoint, I guess that's kind of when I knew I was on to something, at least,
Yeah, see, I feel like that's a common story that we've heard all throughout this year with a lot of our industry sessions. It's like sort of when you know, and when given that first opportunity to explore something that you've always been passionate about but didn't really know you could monetize off it, all the dots seem to connect, and then life seems to open up in so many different ways. And I appreciate hearing stories like that. Jeremy and Pablo, you all are representing A&R, but on the publishing side, and so I want you to share sort of what does that actually mean and look like to our audience. And Jeremy, we'll start with you, and Pablo, please feel free to pop in wherever you see fit.
Yeah, so publishing and record label A&R can be similar, but can also be very different. Record labels sign an artist, and sometimes that artist is a songwriter, and sometimes that artist is not. Publishing companies sign the songwriter, and sometimes they're an artist, and sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're writing songs for other artists. So we are signing, whether they're an artist or not, we are signing the full creative output from this individual, whereas the record labels are really just signing them for that artist project and that output via the artist project. So for instance, we work with a band called Emotional Oranges. They're a newish band. They've been around for a few years. They're signed to Island Records on the master side. We signed the main creative in the project, and his name is Azad. We work with Azad for everything he creates. It could be for Emotional Oranges, but it could also be for everything else he's doing. He's creating different music for other artists. He's got other artist projects that he's working on that isn't related to Emotional Oranges. So we're working with him on a kind of 360 creative level, whereas the labels, for the most part, are working with them for that specific artist project that they're signing.
Cool. And Pablo, what is there any additionals that you want to add to that statement?
It was a great summary of the difference between the label and publishing. I'll just leave it at that. Most people are not aware of the music publishing sides of things, and I encourage the audience to do the research on, music publishing, as it's like a very important side of the business. It always has been, but more so now than ever, I would say.
Yeah.
And the types of writers that we're basically working with, three types of writers, right? So the first is we work with a songwriter named Noah Goldstein. And Noah wakes up every day and he is focused on writing songs for other artists. He does not have the ability of releasing music, nor does he have the interest in releasing music under his own name. He wants to create music with other artists that are going to release that music, whether it's someone in his history he's worked with Kanye West or Travis Scott or The Weeknd or Bon Iver. So he wakes up every morning and is looking to collaborate with those types of artists. Another type of writer we work with could be someone like the Revivalists, which is a band, and they wake up every morning and write songs mainly focused on their project for their artistic output, not for anyone else to release and not for any other reasons, just for them to create an album to release and then tour it. And then the third type of a writer we work with is someone like a Mark Ronson, who has an artist project who he puts out through Sony Records, but he also is writing songs for other artists. And he spends a lot of time going in with people, like in his history, he's gone in with Amy Winehouse and Lily Allen and Lady Gaga, and it goes on and on. Right, and then there's also the ability for someone like Mark to compose music for a film, which he did with Lady Gaga, with Shallow, or for a ballet, or for a theatrical. And it's just everything. And it's kind of at that point, going back to that 360 conversation, you're working with them on everything because they just create music and then they find a way to get it out either through their project or through another method. So those are the kinds of writers that we're working with. Going back to your original question, record labels would really only be working with those people for their one specific project, whether it's Mark Ronson's releases on Sony or the Revivalists for their records. And then Noah Goldstein doesn't have that method of putting out music. So I think that kind of will give everyone an idea of what we're working with.
Yes. I feel like that. Go ahead, Pablo.
No, I would add like a fourth category to the publishing A&R side of things. We also owned old songs, old catalogs of music. And as creatives and as A&Rs, our job is to think of ways that we can bring back that music and to new artists that are happening right now. One recent example is the Ariana Grande song that was #1 last year, I believe. That was a cover of My Favorite Things, which is a song that we own from Rogers and Hammerstein. So that's part of our gig as well. How do we connect the dots of old evergreen songs that are still awesome songs. How do we take them to the new generation? You know, via artists, via producers, via samplings. So yeah, I mean, I would add that as a fourth category.
There's a lot going on now that I'm recently seeing, but I'm sure it's not something that's new. Is that a lot of artists are selling their catalogs, or a lot of different entities are acquiring these catalogs for a lot of money. And so, Pablo, continuing on your train of thought, and Jeremy as well, what is sort of the benefits in an artist selling their catalog to Concord Publishing or another publishing entity?
The main benefit is money.
Yeah.
You know, like if it's a writer or a small publisher that owns a certain number of songs that are making money, and if he or she, you know, just wants to make a lot of money like all at once, you know, they'll just sell it and that's it. You know, and there's all types of deals that can be like acquire all rights, and the writer like no longer has any other income after that, or it can be like a certain type of right that is just acquired. So yeah, I'll let Jeremy.
I mean, the main thing that you're seeing is that these are writers and people that are a little bit older at this point.
Yeah.
And they've held on to the copyrights for such a long time, and there's a trend now where they're seeing a lot of money in it. And at this point, these people are saying, I may never see this kind of dollar amount again. I've held on to it long enough. It's at its peak value. Now is the time to sell. Bob Dylan put out a record this year. He's still very active. He's not done creating music. He's not done touring, but I think he's thinking at this later stage in his career, like this is probably the peak value that it's going to be. And that's kind of going across the entire industry. So a lot of these artists, whether it's Stevie Nicks or even, you know, artists that maybe aren't at that stage in their career just yet, are dipping their toe in and seeing what the value is of these copyrights, and then saying, you know what, now's a good time to kind of cash out because there's so much money in it. You aren't seeing artists in the earlier or middle stages of their career so much doing this because the value of the copyrights hasn't been fully realized. Stevie Nicks and Bob Dylan, which are the two ones that happened late last week and earlier this week, you know, those songs and the value has been fully realized at this point. And if you can get a good deal on it, now is a good time to tap out.
Yeah, I'm curious because Chris and Margie, what I want to unpack really is that relationship between finding the artist and signing the artist to the label. And so, Chris, share with us your process in being able to find an artist, and that conversation that you're having, saying, we want to invest in you and we feel like there is talent there. And then Margie, I would love for you to chime in saying, Chris has brought you an artist, and so what are the next steps there? So Chris, starting with you, what is your process in terms of finding an artist?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it varies how you find one. It could be as simple as a lawyer sending you something, or it could be, you know, a musician that's in one of the bands that, you know, you see kind of has a solo quality to them, or even something as crazy as, you know, when you're out and about, you know, you hear, you know, fans talking about other artists that aren't always well known, you know. So depending on how you find out about them, and then you just kind of approach them after that and see what they're about. I usually like to, you know, check them out live, you know, even before I even start to approach, because you know that's going to be a big part of the process.
Right.
But as far as that, I mean, you know, you just, you know, as much as it is finding talent that you think is there, it's also like you feel like there is, you know, a relationship to be had too, right? Because if the trust gets built, you can build together, and the label can build together, right? So that's an important part of it. I mean, the music part, you know, if you found the right talent, they're already over halfway there, right? The rest is a little bit of fine tuning, depending on how early you catch them. Then the rest is really, you know, about business, about fit. And for an artist, it's like, well, what can the label do now? And that's kind of when, you know, you get them to that point where they're excited about the A&R process or the creative process, and then you bring them to the president, where, you know, they take it from there and let you know why and how you should be with us.
Yeah, and Margie, with that thought, we talk a lot about data and analytics in these sessions and how important they are right now. We know that technology and social media are taking over the industry. And so are there any specific things that you're looking for an artist to have before they come before you?
Yeah, you know, we're probably less analytical than a lot of labels, to be honest with you. We should probably be more so, to be honest with you. But you know, you look at the basic stuff, streaming numbers, touring is a big thing. If you can see that an artist has been touring consistently and building an audience over a certain amount of time. Although with COVID, obviously that's different, but we're kind of old school in the fact that all of our bands are big touring artists. So the touring is a really good way to monitor and see how an artist is developing on the road. But you know, all the rest of the stuff, the typical data analytics that you look at, whether it's streaming or YouTube, you know, YouTube, all those things, as well as touring, I would say. Now with COVID, we don't have that. So, you know, it's not unusual now for me to sign an act that's already got a record already done. So that's kind of a dream. It's awesome because there's no risk. You just they come with this great record and you're like, you just want to sign it. So, I mean, those are some situations that I think are happening now more than ever with COVID. And also you don't, like Chris said, normally I wouldn't sign a band unless I saw them live,
Right.
but you have to now. You have to. So I've signed, I think, four new acts during COVID that I've never even met them.
Yeah.
So in some cases those records are done. In some cases we have to make the records. But yeah, so I would say, you know, we're an independent label, so we're not a major. If you talk to a major, they're going to be reliant much more on analytics than we would be. We're a little bit more still of old school gut kind of vibe.
So could you go more into when you're talking about sort of this, I don't want to call it a risk, but you said you like to sign an artist, you like to see them live before you sign them. And then you've signed artists where you haven't seen them live. So would you define that as a risk, or what made you sort of take that gamble and say, I know that they're going to work, there's a huge ROI here and I want to jump on it now rather than later?
I think if they already have music, that is the main thing. Songs, back to publishing, and if the songs are really strong, if even if they've just done some demos and put them up on SoundCloud or wherever, and we're impressed with those, and you can just kind of see the future for this artist and where they can develop, you just have to roll the dice and take a risk sometimes, you know. We have to nowadays with COVID. I mean, they could also perform, you know, via Zoom and that kind of thing. And
right.
It's just not the same. You can't see the audience reaction. You can't see, again, the audience growing little by little, which is really the most exciting part of the business. You know, you go from, you know, 5 people in the audience to 25 to 50 to 100, and then there's
Right.
you know, an auditorium. So we're figuring it out, you know, but a lot of these artists now, especially during COVID, they have a lot of time. So they're making music at home and they're sending it to us. And
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah, and something that you were sharing throughout your response was all about development, and really in that sort of label representation and A&R space, it's really helping and watching the artist develop. And Jeremy, I'm curious on the songwriter side, what does helping a songwriter sort of develop their craft look like?
Well, you know, if you're signing an early stage writer that needs development, what we're going to start doing is connecting them with other songwriters.
Right.
And other songwriters that maybe are a step or two ahead of them, and kind of using each songwriter that's ahead of them as a different step on a ladder to kind of get to the top. So, hey, you're a new writer, you haven't had any cuts. Here's a writer that has a couple of cuts, that's working with some cool artists. Here's someone that you should work with to write, help build your craft. And then through that, it just kind of builds from there. They kind of open up to other writers that are kind of in that pool. And then we'll kind of start shooting for the next level up. This writer's working with some bigger artists. Let's try to work with that person and kind of get up there by just connecting them with more and more people, introducing them to different people in the industry. Maybe it's, you know, meeting with some A&Rs at labels that they could talk about projects that they could jump in on early. So that's how we would develop a songwriter that's writing for other people with, you know, we are signing artists also that are songwriters that maybe aren't represented by a label yet, and we'll get in early and start developing that project. You'll see there was a trend, and it's still part of the industry, is that artists are a little bit hesitant on what they want to do on the label side, but to say, you know what, let me do a publishing deal. I can do a deal there, bring in a team, maybe get a little bit of money, and then they can help with some creative. They can get some sync stuff from me, or maybe some A&R help, and I can figure out what I want to do on the label side later, because that seems to be more of like a just the history of publishing. It's a little bit kind of behind the scenes, whereas if you do a label deal, that's a little bit more forward facing, and it's a branding thing, and people start to associate you with that label, whereas a publisher is a little bit less invasive to the public. The deals are the same, essentially. You're tied to both partnerships. It's just that the publishing side is a little bit behind the scenes, so you can kind of do that and continue to build and figure out, you know, what you want to do on the record side later.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I think it's exposing the writer to better opportunities, you know, and that can mean getting them into bigger rooms. You know, that means you get them to like a studio with like a better producer, you know, that he can learn from, or exposing them to sync opportunities. And that could be done like in many different ways. If the writer has charisma and is able to do like a showcase, you know, then we can organize a showcase for a bunch of music supervisors, you know, to get to know him, you know, and just try to build out like a path of relationships, if you will, for the writer, depending on the writer and on the style of music. Of course, it's going to go like in different ways, but it's just introducing our writers to, or the artists or the A&Rs or the producers that could at the end of the day cut their song or invite them, you know, for a session that are going to be a co-writer. So.
Yeah, I think I think the overall consensus is really being able to attach yourself, whether it's to a publishing deal or label representation, is really about what opportunities can they open up for you. Something that always comes up in these conversations, specifically when we're talking about label representation, and we talked a little bit about this in our pre-session, is the label, signing to a label versus being an independent artist. And I want to bring this conversation to our audience today, because something that's going on now in the music industry is Chance the Rapper, whose manager is suing him, right? And so my question is that Chance used to be sort of this staple. Everyone was applauding him because he was able to release these mixtapes without any label representation or support. And everyone was like, wow, you're an independent artist. This is cool. This is the new frontier, right? And now that his manager is suing him for this money, saying that we made a verbal agreement and that was not abided by, or Chance decided to pull out was it the big day, or I forget the name of the album, but put out this album and I advised against it. So his manager's making all these claims that are whether true or untrue, but there's money behind them, and everyone's saying this is why you need label representation. And so Margi, I know that you got some comments and some facts to share around this, but when we talk about label versus independent, sort of what are your thoughts on that, and specific to this Chance versus manager conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think in regards to the Chance situation, it really has nothing to do with label, because it has to do with the management situation. So I think the case in point is, you know, do a deal with your manager, have a contract. Have a contract. Anytime you're going to do that kind of business with someone, have a contract.
Yeah.
Because now it's just going to be messy, and a bunch of lawyers are going to get all the money, and they should have had a deal. And it's hard, you know, you're good friends with someone. It happened fairly quickly, his career. So I'm sure they didn't, you know, maybe they didn't want to do a deal, but it's just, it really has nothing to do with the label. I don't think that Chance needs a label, to be honest with you. I think he's doing fine on his own.
Right.
I think that a lot of artists don't need labels, but you have to, you know, Chance is a brilliant marketer. So not every artist has that capability, you know, or wants it. So he was able to do that on his own. And I don't really see a need for a label with him. And I don't think the deal that went down with his manager had anything to do with a label. So I know I'm hearing people saying, if he would have signed to a label, none of this would have happened. I totally disagree with that. It's just a management situation. The other thing that came out in the litigation is the fact that he announced the record, I think in February, because I remember when I saw it on socials, I was like, oh, I didn't know he was in the studio. And you know, we're going to put out a record in July, and I knew he hadn't even started it yet, so
Right.
it's going to be tough. So you know, as a manager, a lot of times artists don't want to listen to you, you know,
Yeah.
especially after you've had success, and it's always a tough thing. It's no different than anything, a politician or anything. If you're going to surround yourself with people that only agree with you, you're going to have limitations. The reason why you want a good manager is to be able to give you advice, and you got to listen to them. And if you don't want to listen to them, then you probably don't need a manager.
Right.
So I don't really, that's sort of a long way of saying I don't think it has anything to do with a label. And I think a lot of artists, you know, John Prine is another Chicago artist from a while ago. He went out on his own and has been very successful independently. So I don't, but just if you're going to do it independently, you better know how to market records and have the other thing that Chance had that a lot of people don't realize is he had a lot of money in those early days. His manager was loaded. So you know, that takes a lot of money to make videos, to go to, you know, all that stuff. He didn't make those videos cheap. So, you know, that was also something that a lot of people aren't aware of, it. There was a lot of money behind him, regardless of a label. Because at the end of the day, that's what you need a manager. That's what you need a label for, is to invest in you and pay money and invest in all kinds of ways, whether it's getting you on the radio or paying for videos. And you know, there's a lot of money to be spent early on, especially.
And I think also why sort of that label conversation is coming into play here is really about sort of the operational and financial support a label can provide an artist. And so in this case with Chance and his manager, he had that support because, as you said, Margie, his manager was loaded. He put in $2.3 million or is it $1 billion up front for Chance, and that's what his manager is suing for. So I think when we talk about the artist going the label route, it's really sort of dissecting what do you actually need as an artist to be successful, and can you do that on your own? But I think that's why.
Yeah, Chance have done that without a manager that had that kind of cash.
Right.
Like if he was early on and he had a manager that didn't have that kind of money, and let's face it, even a big manager probably wouldn't invest that much. He would have to have signed to a label, because you need the money, you need the investment.
I'm curious.
Also,
go ahead.
I mean, also, I think either like a label or a publisher, like what Margie said, are they going to provide money and a team, right? So even if the artist is not going to be signed to a major label, he's still going to need like some sort of team that's going to fill all those positions that a label would fill out anyway, you know, like a PR person, you know, a marketing person. So the conversation about going the label route or not, to me, it's more about, are you going like the major label route or the independent, but it's still like a label route? Because I mean, it's your team that you hired, you know, so I would add that.
Go ahead, Jeremy.
Yeah, I was just going to say, well, one, it's unfortunate because they really, the two of them, the manager and Chance, really helped shift music and the culture behind it for a minute, and the thought process behind putting out music. There was a lot of positives from what they created over the years they worked together. The negatives is that Chance was lightning in a bottle. And there's going to continue to be lightning in a bottle moments with these kind of artists that could take it from scratch all the way to the Grammys and win it completely on their own. But I think there were a lot of artists that kind of came up watching that said, I'm going to do that. And they weren't equipped nor the right artist to pull that off. And so you have a lot of artists that kind of stunted their growth because they were reluctant to partner with anyone. And it kind of slowed everything down, and then their momentum kind of shifted. Whereas if they had that momentum early on and they could have jumped on into a partnership with a label or a publisher, it could have helped really push it to the next level. But a lot of them kind of had that buzz and then kind of flatlined there. So, and it depends on what your intentions are. If you just want to be an independent artist and make a living and do your thing, then that's totally fine. But if your intentions are to be up there on the stage accepting a Grammy Award, those are going to be fewer and far between. And Chance is just a really special artist, and it was a really special moment that they did together. So I kind of, as that was happening, as I was taking meetings with other artists, I could tell that they were really inspired by that, because it was inspiring, but also to some extent could be very misguiding.
I think that a lot of people don't realize that Chance was out like before anyone knew who he was out in front of high schools and
100%.
selling his cassettes for $5. And like he was working his way at Reggie's going, people don't realize and he was just a brilliant marketer early on. And most artists just don't have that, it's very unusual to have that kind of skill set for an artist. It was a rare situation. It is just a shame that it went down like that, because they did something really special. It's just a shame. That's
I was holding out that they would get back together and get the train back on the tracks, but obviously with that news that came out, that's not going to happen.
Yeah, right. And he's also switched over. His brother Taylor and his dad are now managing him. And I think also too, Chance had momentum, right, and creativity behind him. So like you said, Margie, he was in Reggie's and he was selling this cassette, but he had sort of the support of specifically the Black community and the Black church, if you want to unpack it really, which really springboarded him to be able to produce these mixtapes for everyone else to hear. Also, last point on this too is like the argument is that he says like I'm going to produce this album's coming out in February, and he announces it before it even starts. He starts creating it, right? So it's really about what role does whether it's a publishing deal or a label representation, what role do you all play creatively with the artist? And so I'm curious, Chris, to hear from you on that.
Well, I mean, first, just real quickly on the Chance the Rapper situation, I would say, it's a pretty common tell that if a creative puts out a project and it's not successful, whether it's perception or it's reality, it's someone's going to take blame, and it's typically not the artist. You know what I mean? And so, getting back to the situation that's why your relationship with the artist is important, because they only know the creative part, if you have that skill set or marketing part, but it's what they know. So anything outside of what the artist is comfortable with, that's what the trust has to be there to help them guide it through, right? Like to have that conversation. And, like I said, they're not always going to listen. More times than not, they don't always listen, but maybe they'd learn something if it doesn't work, or we learn something if it does work. It's like, okay, that might be too soon to release the album. Have you thought about this? It's in our business, you always want to not be so quick to say no, but suggest another way, right? It's easier to accept that than no. No one likes to hear no matter what it is. You know what I mean? So I think with an artist, you really kind of you guide them through those kind of simple steps, like, what's the concept for the record? Is there a concept, or is it just 12 great songs? Okay, that's fine. If there's touring, when are we touring? What's next? What type of season is it? Is it a seasonal record? It's all these like simple questions that happen like during a lunch when people are allowed to kind of hang with each other and eat, that you could sort all this kind of stuff out. And then before you know it, you kind of have a game plan. But without that, then the cart can definitely get before the horse if you let any one person kind of take the reins and like move on.
Yeah, thank you for that. I want to take a question from our audience, and Christian asked, essentially, they are studying music at California State University in Northridge, and are wanting to go into the space of A&R, and curious to know what could they be doing now in their college career to sort of begin to build experience or credibility that they're someone who can work in this space. And so I'd like for Jeremy and Margie to take this question, and Jeremy, we'll start with you.
Obvious thing is internships. I don't know how likely that is right now with COVID, where people not are in the office, but maybe it could be a virtual internship with the right company. And for me, I did some internships starting out. I wasn't in the A&R department, but that's what exposed me to that world. I didn't even know it was really a thing until I saw it happening, and I was like, oh man, that's it right there. Yeah. But I think connecting with anyone in that world and just trying to build with them, send them music with as many different A&Rs that you can meet, and just tipping them off that you're on to great music, sending them anything you're into, going out to live shows, trying to meet people there whenever that's a possibility again. I really think that's kind of it. For me, kind of piggybacking off what Chris said earlier in the introduction, I don't want to say I Forrest Gumped my way into A&R, but I didn't necessarily come up the usual way of kind of an internship in the creative space and then just working your way up. I couldn't find a way into that. So I just took a job on the more administrative business side, and just used my all my energy to kind of connect with people on the creative side. And when a position did open up in the creative side, the only reason why I was hired was because I knew the administrative side and the business side, and the creative people wanted someone in the group that had that experience. Yeah. And then I was able to use that to get in, and then I started signing things and building up, and it kind of off to the races from that point. So I think if any opportunity comes your way, do that, learn as much as you can, and still try to connect with as many people as possible in the space that you want to be in, because you never know when those opportunities are going to present themselves.
Yeah. Margie, how about what advice might you have? What should someone be doing right now?
I mean, I think all those points that Jeremy said is great. And again, a lot of people have this like fantasy, pun intended, of what A&R is, and it's just this great job, and it's just, hanging with artists, but it's a hard job. Like, you got to make good records, and there is a lot of pressure to make a great, they've got bosses that are like, okay, you signed this act, now you better make a fucking great record. So making records is a skill that I don't think a lot of people realize is very, very important. And then there's all the admin stuff too, being able to work with the studios and handle the budget and staying on budget. And so the one thing I would say too is because I get, some people that send me stuff, and just curate what you send, like really, really be passionate about it, and try to look at the commercials aspect of it, and not like, oh, this artist is great, he's dope, he's awesome here, but try to really think through what whoever you're sending it to, what they're looking for, and curate it. Don't just send a bunch of stuff, because there's sometimes people just, oh, here, this really think about, and it shows you'll have better ears that way if you're just not sending a bunch of random stuff.
Yeah. Well, I like, go ahead, Pablo.
No, I mean, I agree.
I'm curious. I'm curious. I'm curious about, because we've been mentioning sort of this ear for music, right? And are mentioning also the skill set that you need to have and be able to actually produce a record. And so I want to dive deeper into that. And Pablo, when we talk about an ear for music, I've got playlists on my phone. Does that mean? And I think these artists are great. I love them, right? Does that mean I have an ear for music? Talk to us more about what that actually means.
I think the whole concept of having an ear for music can be subjective, right? And I think for anyone to claim that they have an ear for music, I don't know. I think that most of us, like Chris said at the beginning, we are music nerds, by the end of the day. Like, we love music and we are passionate for it. We know little facts and little, pieces of information of the artist that we like, because we just love it, and that's how you get some sort of respect, like in the industry. So I think that passion is just as important as having an ear. And even if you spot the right artist that is going to make it or not, you have to sell in the right way internally, like before you even sign in. Like if I love this artist because of his sound or whatever, is not only because I love him. I have to convince Jeremy that I love him because of this and this, and I have to show him my passion for this artist. And hopefully he'll feel that passion, and he goes, okay, so if he's involved like that, then it means something, It's also about trusting your instincts, but also being open to the fact that that you're a certain age, there's sort of people that are listening to other stuff that you may not be hip to, and it's still important, and you need to be able to pay attention to those trends, and not be, like a music geek that, that's like not, I don't know, a progressive rock that I love, whatever,
Yes.
Yeah,
Rand,
also just having a vision for the artist is really important. Like,
yeah,
what's the vision for the artist? Where do you see, where do you see this artist going in 5 years? Because as an A&R person, you got to bring it in-house and sell it internally. That's the
right.
first sale is in the building. And your vision for that artist is really important. And it's got to match obviously what
Yeah.
the art vision is as well.
I think something for me will really gravitate to me to certain artists. Like someone can send me an artist, and I'll listen to it. And I'll be like, I'm really into pop. That's really like all I listen to. But if I know an artist's story, I gravitate to their music more. If I know the reason behind the music, for some reason my ears switches to a new tune, and I suddenly fall in love with the artist. Chris, I'm wondering how much does an artist's story play into when you're looking, either signing a new artist or just looking to create a relationship with an artist?
I mean, it definitely has an effect. I mean, a good story is a good story, right? Yeah. You know what I mean? And, that'll engage you. And also there's those type of artists that are out there that, like you get set up for a meeting and you meet with them for the first time and they haven't said anything yet. And, everyone on the panel will agree with this. It's like you already have this sense where you're rooting for him or her. Like, there's something about that person that makes you want them to win, which is a vibe that kind of to me transcends everything else that's happening with them. So I mean, I think all that is very important. I mean, you're not gonna. It's hard to get people to like someone that's not likable. I mean, I know that sounds simple, but you could have the talent, an artist with all the talent in the world, but if you just really can't stand that person, it's you know what I mean. Unless your strategy is they become a mystery man or woman and you never ever see them or they talk. Yeah. You know what I mean? You just listen to their music. But I mean, the personality, and to that point, even the drive, it's interesting. I think a lot with, if you're lucky enough to run across like super talented artists, they may not see that way, but there usually is some type of story that separates them kind of like from the pack. It's interesting if you think about it. I tend not to think about that, but thinking about it now, that usually is the case.
Especially from a marketing standpoint, the story is super important.
Yeah.
Really important.
Has there, I'm gonna get a little bit nosy. Has there been an art, this is for anyone, has there been an artist that you all have either heard about or you've seen but didn't really pursue in the, whether it's offering them label representation or signing them to a deal, and sort of passed on, that you now either regret or wish you had approached?
All the time. I mean,
yeah,
there's so much good music coming out. We don't always jump on everything.
Yeah.
And you're like, I'm not sure about this one. And you see it start to go. You're like, all right, you can't be right about them all. Yeah. Just kind of, and sometimes we sign things that were like, a year or two later, like, this one didn't necessarily go as planned, and there could be multiple reasons for that. But yeah, I mean, there's always things that, we all pass on. We don't have the ability to go for whatever reason. And that's part of the gig. But I think if you have you can't stress out over that. Like, I think for us and what we're trying to do, I think we have a pretty specific focus on what we're looking for. Yeah. And we know what that is. It's hard to kind of say it and verbalize it, but I think we all kind of know it when we have our team meetings and what we're looking at. And so if you kind of stick to that with the focus, I think it'll all kind of work out for us. Yeah. And then, it's great that other people are having success, and, we'll keep focusing on our projects and looking for more interesting projects.
Yeah. Chris, how about you? Do you have a similar experience? Has there been a moment where you've sort of missed the moment?
Yeah, I mean, you're gonna probably, it's a bit of a baseball batting average, probably, for what you think, because it really is kind of a gut. And when you make decisions based on your gut, it's also very timely, right? So at the time, let's just say it's a certain type of artist where maybe they're so ahead of he or she is so ahead of themselves as an artist that you just don't get it, because they're future forward with it, and
Right.
you're just not catching it. And then all of a sudden, you know, 3 years later, 4 years later, all of a sudden that's like everybody's doing that, and you're just like, oh, you know what I mean? It happens. It's not, it doesn't feel great, but
Right.
it definitely happens.
Pablo, are there any trends that are currently happening within the music industry that you are currently aware of and that affect the work that you do?
Well, fortunately for me, Latin music is now like a global power. So I'm thankful for that because I have a job.
Yeah.
Because of that, and we're taking over. So, I mean, I would say that one of the bigger trends within the last 5 years is that pop music no longer has to be in English. It can also be in Spanish now, and it's accepted. It used to be that
Korean.
Right, BTS.
Yeah, BTS. Yeah. All the Latin artists, it used to be that they would consider being famous when they would cross over and sing in English.
Right.
Or when they would sing with like an American artist. That's no longer the case. Now it's the other way around. Like all the American artists, they want to collaborate with all the Latin artists. And I moved to the US 20 years ago, and it's been crazy to see like the whole shift of the Latin music. First with the Latin explosion, with Ricky Martin, that was more kind of like a fad, if you will, now to just being taken seriously, and seeing major companies, just open offices in Miami, in Colombia, in Mexico, and really putting money into it because that's where they see, where the future is. So that's, I would say, the bigger trend that I see in my space.
Margie, how about you? Are there any trends that you're aware of that affect the work that you do?
Are you talking just during COVID or just in general?
Just in general.
I mean, I would say the analytics and the data are a lot of it. Streaming, obviously.
Yeah.
That's driving a lot of it. It really is.
Let's go into that a little bit. How does streaming affect? Because before it's artists are selling physical records, right? And there's resources that need to be put into whether it's a CD signing at a Barnes and Nobles, or if anyone wants to throw it all the way back to Borders when that used to be a thing. But now I can use DistroKid and put my stuff on Spotify without any support. So how has streaming really changed the work that labels are doing with artists?
Well, it can be a really great indicator for sure early on. If there's any, how the artist is connecting to consumers that way. And we still do a lot of physical business.
Right.
And one thing that's happened during COVID is, and vinyl has always done well, at least recently, but during COVID, it's overtaken CDs by far for whatever reason. The vinyl business is through the roof. And, we still deal with independent record stores and those kind of things, but I try not to let it get you completely I try not to let the streaming completely drive it, because you can have an artist that you really believe in and just doesn't have huge streaming numbers. So if you really believe in them, you can't let that get you down. Whereas I know other labels might say, oh, they've had this look and they've only streamed a couple 100,000. It's not enough. It didn't react. We're, again, a little bit old school in that if we really believe in the artist, that's not going to deter us.
Yeah. So something that we're always sharing in these sessions are like sort of how to be successful in the different roles that we are showcasing. And something that I like to try to do is peel back the curtain and keep it real. And so Jeremy, talk to us about like what is sort of one of the biggest challenges that you have in being A&R on the publishing side that you would like for sort of our audience to be aware of, so that if they're pursuing this career, they're sort of ahead of the game.
The challenges.
Yeah.
Doing A&R. I'd say that it kind of goes back a little bit to a question you asked a little while ago, and about, have we ever passed on something that you can kick yourself later? And I think the challenge is, and I kind of learned this over time, is like trying to like really have a focus of what you're trying to accomplish and sticking to that. And it's hard because it's music. And if you're doing this, you should love music. And sometimes you may be really passionate about something, but it maybe doesn't land into that focus area that you're trying to work in.
Yeah.
And you find yourself drifting out of that and you try to rationalize it. And once you kind of start doing that, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
So I think this is kind of what I've kind of come to realize through the years is it's really got to be focused. If you start to sense any hesitation, don't do it. And it's hard because, going back to what I said, you hear something great that you love and you start to see stars in your eye. Oh man, this person's going to be great. They're going to change and shift music and this is going to be it. And you know, it's maybe not. And it's, if it's starting to veer outside of that, and then, you know, as these kind of deals, you know, bidding wars start to kick up, you start to get caught up in that and you want to be the, you know, the big dog and show that you can kind of hang and do this. You're probably starting to get out of your element. And there's, you know, at least that's how I kind of look at how we're operating. And, you know, we are pretty focused and curated, and we're not going to just jump on everything. Right. And you don't want to just all of a sudden look at your roster after a couple of years and realize you kind of went after all these things.
Yeah.
They're all over the place and there's no connectivity to it. And they're just, oh, this one was that and this one is that. It's like, stay focused and try to like keep your eye on the prize kind of thing. Because it's easy to kind of get caught up doing this job because there's a lot of whining and dining and all that stuff. So yeah, I think that's it. I think that's the challenge. Pablo, do you agree with me?
Yeah. Maybe to answer the question like in a different way, as far as the challenges to make it in this career.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you,
yeah.
It's an industry that the music industry, the entertainment industry is very hard to get in at first, I would say, because it's seen as a very cool type of industry that you go to parties, you go to shows, and you drink with people, and that's part of the job. So there's lots of people that want to get in, and that makes it hard to get in. So, and like Jeremy was saying, it's hard, especially hard to get in all the creative roles, a producer or an artist or A&R. And I would say the biggest challenge is to be patient, try to get in the door doing whatever, if you get a label, as the mailman, do it the best way you can.
Yeah.
Because I mean, like, no one's gonna hire like an A&R right after college,
right? Or
put like a job posted, I mean, they're looking for an A&R. I mean, that's not gonna happen like that, It's only gonna happen if you're present in the scene, in the industry, in the scene that has the music that you want to be a part of. That's a big part of it too, If you want to be in a music industry in a specific type of style, move to that city, like become a tastemaker.
Yeah.
That city. So A&Rs are going to start seeing you. Oh, look at that guy. He was at every show that I've been, he was talking to the bass player. He was talking like he knows someone,
Right.
That's the only way, just go to a bunch of shows. I go to a bunch of social events like this one in person, and meet everyone you can, and be nice.
Yeah.
Try being nice. That always helps.
And what I've seen too is simply on the creative side, those who have had some of the most success in getting in the door are those who have that strong entrepreneurial spirit, and they've started to build something on their own, and and people have noticed, like you were saying, Pablo, like, wow, you're really invested in this, and if you're willing to take the risk on yourself, then I think that we're willing to take the risk on you. So I appreciate the sentiment that you're sharing.
It's a long game.
Yeah, it's
always.
It's a marathon, not a sprint, I think is what they say. I sprint everywhere, so that is not my forte. This has been such an informative and great conversation. We've got about a minute left, and so I want to wrap up. And I think, Pablo, you've already started us off sort of really giving words of advice to our audience today, and something that you would tell your younger self. Let's go. Words of advice to your younger self is how I'd like to close today's conversation. And so, Jeremy, we'll start with you, and then if each of you could just give us a short and concise piece of advice, I'd love to end the conversation that way. So, Jeremy?
Yeah. Going back to what I said earlier, if you want to do creative and you can't get in there, take whatever opportunity you can get and crush it, and try to meet as many people as possible and learn. so you know how the business works inside and then later out. It'll just make it easier because everyone could be creative. Like you said, DeMarco, you have an ear for music. Everyone has an ear for music, but do you know how this whole thing's work? So I think it's kind of getting that information early and learning.
Cool. Margie, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, same thing. Get your foot in the door and just work really hard. Pablo, I think also the be nice thing is definitely something, and like be honest and nice is really important. That'll help. But just work really hard and get your foot in the door, you know?
Yeah. Chris, how about you?
I mean, all great points, especially the be nice part, which I think a lot of people miss. But I would say be confident. You know, there's going to be a lot of times if you get your foot in the door that you might be the only one in the room that believes, and that's just part of the gig. Yeah. And that's why you got to turn the room around, and that's when you got to go with your gut. And if you are doing all the other things that everyone's talked about already, then you know that's the last part of the journey, and everything from there, it just kind of comes with time. But you definitely got to come in with some confidence because you're going to get challenged.
Yeah.
You know, and not in a negative way, just like, well, why do you're asking the company to spend 6 to 7, a lot of money on an artist that you believe. So, without that confidence, they're just going to be less inclined to move forward with confidence. So if you're not confident, no one else is going to be. So just remember that, believe in yourself and believe in who you can be. It's important.
And Pablo, last but not least.
Sure. I would say that the music industry, whether you want to be an artist, A&R, or whatever, you have to see it as a lifestyle and not as a career. Because that's what I would tell my younger self. You have to love it, especially at the beginning, because you're not going to make any money at all, even if you work for the majors or if you're the assistant to a famous manager or whatever. It's a lifestyle, and the lifestyle is that you love music and that you want to be a part of the whole process, so with that, just be patient, so like maybe like your first 2 jobs are boring. The first job that I had, I was at BMI, and I hated it because I had to wear a tie every day, and it was the most boring entry-level job that I had in my life. And as soon as I quit that job, I made it a point that any job that I would take after that, it would be based not on the salary, but on what I could learn from it. So after that, I took a job at a way smaller company with less money, but that it exposed me and opened the doors to like all these other people. And it's a lifestyle, you just go to shows and you love music. That's what it is.
Thank you all so much for being here today and for sharing this great insight and knowledge with our participants and with Music4. Shout out to Anush, who helped us curate this panel and this whole week of programming with Concord. So I definitely appreciate you all being here and engaging with us. And please enjoy the rest of 2020. And I look forward to speaking to you all again because I'm sure that we're going to have you back in some capacity. And thank you to our audience for always joining us. Next week is sadly our last industry session, and we'll be talking about entrepreneurship in music, which I think is a great way to end 2020. So I cannot wait to see you all back next week here at 3 o'clock. But until then, stay safe and be well. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.